November 21st, 1985. Littleton, Colorado. A masked gunman enters the home of 51-year-old businessman Roger Dean and forces him to tie up his wife, DJ. After an apparent dispute over money, the gunman fatally shoots Roger and flees the scene, but investigators find evidence to suggest that Roger hired the intruder himself in a failed attempt at a kidnapping scheme. Nearly 5 years later, DJ receives an anonymous letter from a man claiming to be Roger's killer, who threatens to murder her daughter unless she pays him $100,000. Even though DJ drops off the money at a specified location, it is never picked up, and the perpetrator remains unidentified. After that, the trail went cold. Hello everyone, and welcome to our latest episode of The Trail Went Cold. I'm your host Robin Warder, and we've got a classic unsolved mysteries case to cover this week, the 1985 murder of Roger Dean. This is the bizarre story of a businessman who was killed in his own home by a masked gunman in what appeared to be a botched robbery. The crime took place while Roger's wife DJ was tied up in the bedroom, but the trauma would only get worse for her years later when she received an anonymous extortion letter from the alleged killer, who threatened to kill her daughter if DJ did not pay him a large amount of money. What's particularly unique about this case is that a number of law enforcement figures involved in the investigation seem to have differing opinions about certain things. Some of them believe that the extortionist was Roger's killer, while others believe it was a completely different person who was trying to capitalize on DJ's tragedy to get money from her. There's also been debate about whether Roger and the masked man who shot him were originally in cahoots together on some sort of scheme before things went horribly wrong. Even though he was definitely the victim here, it is apparent that Roger had a number of secrets in his background, but investigators have never been able to pinpoint what exactly happened which led to him being killed, as nothing about this case seems to make complete sense. So in this episode, we're going to be exploring Roger's murder and the attempted extortion of his wife, and try to figure out if these are actually different crimes which were committed by different individuals. However, before we get started, just a quick reminder that The Trail Went Cold is a weekly podcast, which is currently available for download on several platforms, including iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play Music, and Spotify. So if you like this podcast, be sure to subscribe to it, and please leave us a rating or review on any of those sites to help spread the word and garner us more exposure. The Trail Went Cold is on Patreon, so if you would like to learn how to support the show, please visit our page at patreon.com/thetrailwentcold. For as little as $1 a month, you can garner access to exclusive rewards, which may include stickers and thank you cards, early access to episodes, and bonus content. So with all that out of the way, let us now explore the murder of Roger Dean. Our story begins in Littleton, Colorado in 1985. Our central figure is 51-year-old Roger Dean, who is the co-owner of Sinsel Dean Brokerage Company Incorporated, a food brokerage firm which sells food products to grocery chains. Roger lives in the Lone Tree subdivision with his 50-year-old wife Doris Jean, who goes by the nickname DJ. The couple have been married for 26 years and have a 24-year-old married daughter named Tammy, but tragically, the Deans lost their 22-year-old son Troy in January of 1983 after he was killed in a car accident at a train crossing. The tragedy would be compounded a few months later when DJ's parents were both killed in another accident. On the morning of Wednesday, November the 21st, DJ woke up and had just finished taking a bath when she heard Roger call her into the bedroom shortly after 7 a.m. After she walked in there, DJ was surprised to see a male intruder wearing a ski mask standing beside her husband with a gun. He ordered Roger to tie DJ up with some rope and blindfold her with duct tape, and after she was placed on the bed, the two men exited the bedroom. While she was lying there, DJ thought she could hear Roger and the intruder talking in their daughter's former bedroom, but she could not make out what they were saying. After a few minutes, the intruder returned and demanded to know how much money the couple had in their savings account. DJ said she did not know and could hear the man frantically searching through some drawers before a loud noise from outside prompted him to flee the room. After hearing what sounded like a scuffle in the hallway, DJ overheard the gunman yelling at Roger that he owed him money. Roger responded by saying that he had $30,000 in his account, so the gunman told him that they were both going to the bank to get it. However, it wasn't long before DJ could hear the sound of a gunshot, followed a few seconds later by a successive series of gunshots. This prompted DJ to flee the bedroom while still blindfolded and with her hands tied, and she managed to make it downstairs and exit the house. It was around this point when a neighbor who saw what was happening ran over to DJ to untie her and remove the duct tape from her eyes. DJ was then shocked to see that Roger was now lying at the foot of the driveway with several gunshot wounds in his body. His ankles were bound with duct tape, so it seemed apparent that the intruder had subdued Roger inside their daughter's bedroom, but he somehow managed to break free. The gunman caught up to Roger, where they had the conversation about the $30,000, but Roger apparently attempted to flee down the stairs. The intruder subsequently fired off his gun, but the bullet ricocheted off the banister and struck Roger in his left arm. The gunman then fired 5 more shots into Roger, who managed to exit the house before he collapsed, as the intruder fled the scene in a vehicle. Police and paramedics were summoned to the home, and Roger was taken to the hospital, but he was pronounced dead an hour later. It turned out the attacker's mask had been removed, possibly as the result of a struggle with Roger, and it was found at the top of the stairs. There would be multiple eyewitness accounts from neighbors who remembered seeing a car parked down the street from the dean's house for about an hour prior to the murder, and some school children waiting for their bus had seen a white man climbing into the car and fleeing the scene. Unfortunately, the witnesses' descriptions of the car were inconsistent, as some remembered it being a 1968 Pontiac, while others believed it was a 1976 Oldsmobile. While the assailant was climbing into his vehicle, a girl looking out a window managed to catch a glimpse of his face, though oddly, she described him as being a black man. Investigators attempted to reenact the situation by looking out the window at a Caucasian officer, and they noticed that he did look dark-skinned from that position while walking through the bright white snow. Based on DJ's description of the masked gunman, they felt pretty certain that he was white. DJ's account of what happened made it sound like the intruder had made an attempt to kidnap Roger in order to force him to withdraw money from his bank account, but something went wrong, which prompted him to shoot Roger instead. However, it wasn't long before investigators noticed some odd details which made them suspect there might be more to this story. Rope was found in the bedroom, which formerly belonged to the dean's daughter, Tammy, and it had seemingly been used by the killer to tie up Roger before he managed to free himself and make an attempt to escape. But it turned out that twine fiber was embedded in only one of Roger's wrists, suggesting that the killer had not completely tied him up. Roger usually wore glasses, though he had been wearing contact lenses at the time he was shot. Yet for some reason, his glasses were found covered in duct tape in Tammy's bedroom. It also seemed strange that Roger was even still at the house past 7 a.m. on a weekday, as he usually left for work no later than 6:15. In fact, neighbors actually remembered seeing Roger drinking coffee in the garage at 7 o'clock while he was lifting up the garage door, and his full coffee cup was found on top of some newspapers on a trash can. Investigators now started to wonder if Roger may have actually hired the masked gunman himself in order to stage his own kidnapping. When Roger opened the garage door, the gunman was likely waiting down the street inside his car, and this may have been the signal for him to enter the house. As you recall, DJ had overheard Roger telling the gunman that he had about $30,000 in the bank. Well, it turned out that 8 months prior to his death, Roger had secretly transferred $32,000 from his company's bank account and deposited it into a private account, and he did so without DJ's knowledge. So one of the prevailing theories was that Roger and the intruder were putting on a show for DJ, and that he would pretend to kidnap Roger before they went to the bank and he withdrew the $32,000. After they went their separate ways, Roger would subsequently contact the police and provide a bogus cover story about being robbed and forced to withdraw the money against his will, when in actuality, he would keep the $32,000 for himself. And of course, since DJ was present when Roger's accomplice entered the house and had her tied up, she would be able to back up Roger's story. But if that was the original plan, it wasn't quite clear why the gunman killed Roger instead and fled the scene. It turned out that Roger also had another big secret. He had been involved in an extramarital affair with his secretary. DJ did find out about it, but Roger assured her that the affair was over and that he wanted to repair their marriage. However, DJ learned that Roger did meet with his secretary on the week of his death. Both the secretary and her son left town shortly after the crime, and neither of them have ever officially been ruled out as suspects, as evidence of their involvement has been described as quote-unquote inconclusive. Well, in spite of their personal troubles in their marriage, DJ was pretty skeptical about the police's theory that Roger staged the whole episode with the masked gunman, and did not believe he would have ever willingly put her through such a traumatic ordeal. Even though Roger had a lucrative insurance policy for DJ and Tammy, neither of them were considered suspects, and they both passed polygraph tests. Tammy would tell police that her father had become unusually protective of her in the months prior to his death, and shortly after the murder, she started receiving threatening phone calls, which prompted Tammy and her husband to move to Arizona. Investigators started looking into possible motives for killing Roger. While he had some minor disputes with business associates over the years, none of them stood out as potential suspects. It turned out that Roger had been working as an informant with the Denver Police Department in order to provide them with information about prostitution which had been taking place on some property he owned. Roger also had extended family members who had been arrested on charges related to organized crime, and some of them have not been completely ruled out as potential suspects. One potential theory is that Roger could have met one of these distant relatives at a family get-together and convinced him to become involved in his botched kidnapping scheme. But in the end, none of these leads went anywhere, and the investigation would remain at a standstill for over 4.5 years until there was an unexpected development. On July 21, 1990, DJ received an anonymous letter written by someone claiming to be Roger's killer. The writer provided a number of details about the murder in order to prove they were legitimate. He wrote, quote, "I didn't kill you, even knowing you could be a witness if you were ever caught, but that will never happen. By now, you should realize that I am one of the 2 persons who seized your Lone Tree house with orders to kill Roger if he didn't pay his debt. You were right with one of us." End quote. He then demanded $100,000 and said that if DJ did not pay, he would go after Tammy. By this point, Tammy had returned to Littleton to move back in with her mother. From the details he provided in the letter, it seemed like the writer knew Tammy personally and had been stalking her. One excerpt read, quote, "Do you know that I have met your daughter Tammy on a few occasions? I have followed her to New York, Arizona, and Costa Mesa. She is a very attractive blonde and a good model. Do not make me kill her." End quote. He closed things out by writing, quote, "Your son is dead. Your husband is dead. Do not risk your daughter. She is the last one left. If you go to the police, I'll wait until they can no longer protect her and kill her." End quote. The writer also promised that he would call DJ in 6 days. Well, in spite of his warning, DJ and Tammy decided to turn the letter over to the Douglas County Sheriff's Department, and the Denver branch of the FBI soon became involved in the investigation. Upon reading the letter, the FBI became convinced it was genuine and had been written by the same man who killed Roger. The lead agent called these actions unprecedented, as they had never seen a killer contact their victim's family years after the crime in order to extort them, so they offered DJ and Tammy round-the-clock protection. The writer called DJ as promised on July 27th, but by this point, the FBI had put a wiretap on her phone. The caller claimed that Roger had owed him money, and that DJ was obligated to pay him $100,000, so she agreed to his demand. He said he would call her again to provide instructions about how to pay the money before he hung up. The FBI traced the call to a phone booth in Denver, but by the time they arrived there, the caller was long gone. Over the course of the next few weeks, the extortionist would phone DJ nearly a dozen times, and each time, the calls were traced to various Denver phone booths. Investigators believed that the caller was holding a cloth over the phone while he spoke in order to disguise his voice. It was not until the evening of August the 19th, when he finally provided instructions for DJ to pay the $100,000, telling her to drive to a phone booth at a supermarket located 20 miles away. The FBI set up a surveillance operation, and while DJ drove to the location, an agent hid in the back of her car. After she arrived at the phone booth, DJ waited around for a while until she received another call. This time, the man gave her directions to an apartment complex in downtown Denver and instructed her to leave the money in an alley behind the building. DJ drove to the location and dropped a bundle containing $100,000 in the alley at around 10 p.m. before she left. The FBI kept their eyes on the money overnight, but by the time morning arrived, the caller had not shown up to collect it. However, it turned out that a couple of hours after DJ made the drop, Tammy received a threatening, profanity-filled phone call from the extortionist. He expressed anger over DJ not following his instructions and told Tammy that he was going to kill her. He said it might occur in 6 months or 6 years, but that it would happen when she was least expecting it. Later that morning, DJ received one final phone call from the extortionist, informing her that he had seen the police presence in the area when she made the money drop and that he was going to kill Tammy. He said that he had patience and could wait until the family was no longer receiving protection from the authorities. One of the calls he made the previous night was traced back to a phone booth at a 7-Eleven convenience store in Denver. In an odd coincidence, 2 of the investigators on the case had stopped to get coffee there around the exact same time. Shortly after they left, they were informed that the call had been traced to the store, prompting them to turn around and race back there, but by the time they arrived, the caller was already gone. DJ would not receive any more calls or letters from the extortionist, and thankfully, no attempts were ever made on Tammy's life. The case was featured on an episode of Unsolved Mysteries in November of 1991, and at the end of the segment, Robert Stack mentioned that investigators believe that a man and a woman may have worked in conjunction to write the extortion letters, but there was no further elaboration on this. The Colorado Bureau of Investigation would eventually provide their assistance by re-examining and retesting evidence from the murder scene. They were able to collect DNA samples from the hair and saliva found in the killer's ski mask, which had been left behind at the scene. Thus far, the DNA has failed to match anyone, though investigators have said there were 6 potential suspects they wanted to collect DNA samples from, but they declined to provide them voluntarily. Even though the FBI initially believed that Roger's killer wrote the extortion letters, the Douglas County Sheriff's Department has since expressed their disagreement with this, as all of the details provided about the murder in the letter were already public knowledge at that time, and during his phone calls with DJ, the extortionist never provided any information that only the killer could have known. The lead investigator on the case, Anthony Spurlock, believes that someone connected to the Dean family attempted to take advantage of their tragic situation in order to extort money from them, stating, quote, "The suspect in the murder case and the suspect in the extortion are 2 different people, but there is a difference of opinion in some circles." End quote. Whatever the case, the identity of Roger Dean's killer, as well as the motive for his murder and the subsequent extortion attempt on his wife, continue to remain unsolved mysteries. So I guess you could say, the trail went cold. Well, this is definitely one of the more confusing and complex cases I've ever featured on the podcast, but I think some of the confusion stems from the fact that there seems to be some contradictory information out there. I apologize in advance if there was some incorrect and inaccurate info on this episode, but when researching this story, I kept running into issues with different sources giving different accounts of events. For instance, on Unsolved Mysteries, they make it sound like DJ only went on one money drop for the extortionist, and that she received a phone call at the supermarket and dropped the money in an alley on the exact same night. However, I read one article which stated that the phone call at the supermarket and the money drop in the alley both occurred on separate nights. I've also read conflicting info about whether or not the secretary Roger was having an affair with was cleared as a suspect. Whatever the case, I've attempted to share this story as best I can. I think some of the confusion might be the result of 2 different law enforcement agencies, the FBI and the Douglas County Sheriff's Department, having different ideas about what happened. When you watch the Unsolved Mysteries segment, you're left with the impression that the FBI was absolutely certain that the extortionist who contacted DJ was the same person who murdered her husband. But as the years have gone by, the Douglas County Sheriff's Department have expressed their belief that the extortionist had no involvement in Roger's murder and was just trying to capitalize on the situation to make some money. And while the authorities initially believed that Roger invited his killer into his home to orchestrate a failed kidnapping/robbery scheme, which went horribly wrong, it seems like they're not quite as sure about that anymore. If it's true that the killer and the extortionist were not actually the same person, then it seems we have two entirely different mysteries here. All that being said, one thing which seems very likely is that Roger's hands were probably not entirely clean in this whole affair, and he had some secrets in his background which played a role in his death. One of the reasons the authorities thought Roger might have orchestrated the whole thing with the intruder is because he normally left for work no later than 6:15 a.m., yet he was still at his house at 7 o'clock, and seen inside his garage raising the door, which could be interpreted as a signal for the masked gunman to meet him inside. However, while this may seem like a minor point, I'm always struck by the fact that Roger was seen drinking coffee when he lifted up the door, and a full cup was found in the garage. The investigators' original theory was that Roger was staging the entire scene with the masked man for the purpose of putting on a show for his wife, as he wanted to make it look like this guy had abducted him and forced him to withdraw $32,000 from his bank account against his will. Since Roger had secretly transferred $32,000 from his business into this account, this would function as a cover story to explain how the money went missing so that he could keep it for himself. Well, if this was the plan, why would Roger fix himself a full cup of coffee right before this happened? I mean, sure, maybe he did this on purpose to make his quote-unquote kidnapping look more convincing, but if Roger was ordinarily not in the habit of being at his house and making coffee at 7 a.m. on a weekday morning, then this is going to look a bit odd. Don't get me wrong, I do believe that Roger's behavior suggests that he was expecting someone to show up at his house that morning, but I'm not so sure he anticipated this person would pull out a gun and force him to tie up his wife. I know that DJ claimed she overheard Roger tell the intruder that he had $30,000 in his account, and he replied by telling Roger that they were going to the bank to get it. But this is another odd detail to me, because how often are banks open at 7 a.m.? Where I'm from at least, banks usually don't open until around 8:30, 9 o'clock at the earliest. So if this was an elaborate scheme to make it look like Roger was forced to empty his bank account against his will, I'm not sure why they would stage this an hour or two before the bank was even open. But let's look at these events from DJ's point of view. We only really have her account of what went on inside the house that morning, but since she was tied up and blindfolded, a lot of the details are going to be murky. It's unclear what time DJ woke up, but we know that she had been taking a bath before Roger asked her to join him in the bedroom shortly after 7 o'clock. I don't know what DJ's normal morning routine was, but since Roger generally left the house at around 6:15, I have to wonder if she had no idea Roger was even still there at the time she took her bath. According to DJ, after she was tied up, Roger and the gunman left the bedroom before the intruder returned and demanded to know how much money they had in their savings account. He started searching through all the drawers before he heard a noise and ran out, and that's when DJ overheard his exchange with Roger about the $30,000, and immediately thereafter, he shot Roger and fled the scene. Now, if you believe the theory about Roger staging the whole thing, then it's possible that the intruder asking DJ about the money in their savings account and going through the drawers was all done for show. But let's suppose this wasn't a charade. I'm going to talk about this in more detail momentarily, but one alternate theory which has been proposed is that Roger was being blackmailed by this man, so he made arrangements for a meeting at the house that morning. Roger may have intentionally chosen the time when he knew DJ was upstairs taking a bath, so he raised the garage door as a signal for his blackmailer to meet him inside there. The man may have been expecting a payoff, but Roger either flat out refused to pay, or he told him he had no money inside the house. So the man surprised Roger by pulling out a gun, leading him upstairs, and forcing Roger to tie up DJ, before he personally tied up Roger in a separate bedroom. He then tore apart the house searching for money, and asked DJ how much money they had in their savings account. Of course, it turned out that Roger had deposited $32,000 in a separate account without DJ's knowledge, so she wouldn't have been able to provide the correct answer. The intruder left the bedroom when he heard a noise, which was likely Roger after he freed himself and was making an attempt to escape. The main problem I have with the theory that Roger and the intruder were in on this together is that there doesn't seem to be any reason for him to shoot Roger before he had the chance to collect any money, and this only would have been necessary if Roger was making a legitimate attempt to escape. One theory I've seen proposed is that the shot the intruder fired into the banister was only intended as a warning shot, but he did not expect the bullet to ricochet and strike Roger in the arm. Of course, now that Roger had a gunshot wound, there was no way he was going to be able to visit the bank and withdraw any money, so even if Roger and the intruder were in on this together, the accidental wound may have made him think that he had no choice but to finish the job and kill Roger. When you look at how these events played out, it really does seem more logical that Roger was genuinely surprised when the intruder pulled a gun on him, rather than that they orchestrated this whole thing together. All that being said, there are still some weird details which make me understand why the police thought this might have been staged, such as twine fibers only being found in one of Roger's wrists and the duct tape covering his glasses, even though he was wearing contact lenses at the time. Now, in the Unsolved Mystery segment, the reenactment shows Roger wearing his glasses during the scene where he ties up DJ, but he's not wearing them in the scene where he is shot. Of course, I can't be certain these reenactments are 100% accurate, but if they are, the implication seems to be that the intruder wrapped duct tape around Roger's eyes while he was wearing his glasses, but when he managed to free himself from his ropes, he took off his glasses and ran, rather than attempting to remove the tape. But if Roger was wearing contacts, why would he have had his glasses on to begin with? So I can definitely see both sides here, but I think I lean towards Roger not working in cahoots with the gunman. I'm really confused by the idea that Roger orchestrated this charade as a cover story to explain $32,000 disappearing from his bank account, because it sounds like no one else even knew this account existed to begin with. A staged robbery seems like a needlessly elaborate way to do this, especially since he would probably have to give his accomplice a cut of that money anyway. Since this $32,000 was taken from Roger's company bank account, it's not entirely clear if this was embezzlement or not. I know Roger was the co-owner of his food brokerage firm, but I'm guessing that his business partner was unaware that Roger withdrew that money. But since it was transferred to a private account, which Roger's wife did not even know about, it seems like he had his reasons for keeping it secret, and I do not have a hard time believing that Roger had something shady going on in his background which could have played a role in his murder. Now, I'd say there was a fairly good chance Roger was being blackmailed by the masked gunman, and they had arranged for a private meeting at his house that morning, but I don't understand why Roger would do this while his wife was still at home. Yes, he may have been hoping to hold the meeting in the garage while DJ was upstairs taking a bath, but still, why not arrange a meeting at another location? Since this detail was never mentioned in Unsolved Mysteries, I was quite surprised when I found out that Roger had been having an affair with his secretary and that DJ knew about it. Even though Roger had told DJ he ended the affair, he was apparently seen with the secretary in the week prior to his death. Investigators have said that the secretary and her son left town shortly after the murder and have never been ruled out as suspects, so it's tempting to believe that perhaps the masked man was the secretary's son and he was attempting to blackmail Roger. Of course, the biggest issue with that theory is that DJ already knew about the affair anyway, but this may have been the exact reason Roger refused to pay his blackmailer any money, which could have angered him and prompted him to pull out a gun and attempt a robbery. But it's also possible that this had nothing to do at all with the secretary or the affair, and the masked man was blackmailing Roger for a completely different reason, such as him embezzling money from his company or being involved in something illegal. Whatever the case, it does not seem like what occurred that morning was a well-thought-out plan, so I don't think the gunman originally showed up at Roger's house with the intention of killing him until things went horribly wrong. But the extra complication with figuring out what happened to Roger is the uncertainty about whether or not the extortionist who contacted DJ 4.5 years later was the actual killer. At the time, the FBI said that it was pretty unprecedented for a murderer to contact his victim's family and attempt to extort money from them years after the fact, but they still seemed pretty convinced that it was the same man. I think they believed this because the original letter sent to DJ contained explicit step-by-step details about Roger's murder, but the lead investigator, Anthony Spurlock, has since stated that all these details were already public knowledge, so he does not believe this proved that the writer was involved in the crime. Well, they show a photo of the actual letter during the Unsolved Mystery segment, and it wasn't until they released a clean, remastered version of the segment on Amazon Prime that I was able to freeze frame the letter and read most of it, though parts of it are cut off. It's true that most of the details provided are public knowledge, but one line contains a piece of information which I've never seen published anywhere. It reads, quote, "I left my black bag, which contained tape, rope, and a knife, some of your jewelry lost in the struggle," end quote. Well, I've never seen any mention of the black bag or DJ's jewelry in any of the sources I've uncovered about the case, but this information could have been shared in the media at the time the crime took place. I do think it's interesting that the extortionist said Roger owed him money, but even though Roger had told his killer he was going to get him $30,000, the writer demanded $100,000. However, I really can't overlook the timing of this whole thing, as the letter arrived shortly after Tammy returned to Littleton and moved back in with her mother. In fact, one of the main reasons Tammy and her husband had decided to move away from Littleton to Arizona was because she was receiving threatening phone calls following her father's murder. I really don't think this is a coincidence, especially since the letter writer claimed he had met Tammy personally on a few occasions and had been following her movements. Since Tammy was a former model, you almost get the impression that the writer had some sort of obsession with her and that extorting money from her mother was the secondary motive. I'd be curious to know what happened to Tammy's husband by this point. It's never been explicitly stated, but if Tammy moved back in with her mother, then that would seem to indicate that her marriage had come to an end. Whoever the writer was, they clearly had knowledge of the Dean family's tragic backstory and really wanted to take advantage of DJ's vulnerability and the fact that Tammy was the only family she had left. If the extortionist had no actual involvement in Roger's murder and was only doing this to get money from DJ, then it was not a very well thought out plan. In spite of the writer's threats in the letter not to contact the police, DJ did so anyway, and he wound up calling her nearly a dozen times over the course of the next 3 weeks, before he finally provided instructions for her to drop off the $100,000. That demonstrates to me that he was pretty paranoid and unsure of himself, and it does not surprise me at all that he did not show up to get the money after DJ dropped it off. He likely figured out that DJ had involved the authorities, which is why he never made any more extortion attempts. But it sounds like he took great pleasure in tormenting both DJ and Tammy, and making them live in constant fear that he could pop up and murder Tammy at any moment. This suggests that he had some sort of hatred against the Dean family, which overshadowed his desire for money. Now, at the end of the Unsolved Mystery segment, Robert Stack stated that the authorities believed that a man and a woman had worked in conjunction to write the extortion letters. The writer did use the phrase, "one of the two persons," to imply that there was someone else involved in the murder who ordered him to kill Roger because he didn't pay a debt. At the time, I had no idea why they thought the second person might be a woman, but now that we know Roger had an affair with his secretary, and that both she and her son were looked at as potential suspects, this makes a lot more sense. Of course, there's very little info out there about the secretary or her son, only that they left town shortly after Roger's murder, so I have no idea what their current whereabouts might have been at the time the extortion took place. However, even if the son was the letter writer, that does not necessarily mean he was the masked gunman who committed the murder. He could have been nothing more than an opportunist who decided to get revenge on the Dean family for Roger's affair with his mother, and thought this would be an effective way to earn some money at the same time. Even if the scheme didn't pay off, and he didn't get to collect the money, perhaps he still thought it was worthwhile enough, just so he could put DJ and Tammy through hell. But even if investigators suspect the secretary and his son were involved in this, they have never uncovered any evidence which conclusively links them to either the murder or the extortion scheme. They do have quite a bit of evidence to implicate the killer, most especially the ski mask he left behind at the scene containing his DNA, which they would not have been able to test back in 1985. I know that at one point, investigators stated that there were at least 6 potential suspects who would not voluntarily submit a DNA sample for testing, and I would not be surprised if one of them was the secretary's son. It sounds like they do have enough evidence to secure a conviction should they ever make a DNA match, but since a match could not be found in any of the DNA databases, it seems like the killer has never been convicted of a crime. So given the confusing nature of this case and some of the contradictory evidence, it's hard to figure out what really happened here. In addition to the secretary and her son, investigators did look at other possible angles, including Roger's business dealings, his work as an informant with the Denver PD, and the fact that he had some distant relatives who were involved in organized crime. But there really isn't enough hard information about any of these leads to know if they have any significance. But I personally believe there's a good chance that Roger was involved in something illegal which he did not want people to know about, and it may have been connected to the $32,000 that he had transferred to his secret bank account. Whatever it was, it may have prompted Roger to arrange a secret meetup in his garage with the man who ultimately killed him. I'm on the fence about whether or not Roger's killer and DJ's extortionist are the same person, especially when you consider that 2 different law enforcement agencies can't even agree on that. But there is one line in the extortion letter which makes me lean towards it being a hoax. At one point, the writer says, quote, "I took off my ski mask so Roger would know who killed him and why," end quote. Well, that part just doesn't ring true to me. Investigators initially believed that the mask came off during a struggle with Roger and that the killer simply forgot about it when he fled the scene. I'm not sure why he would remove the mask voluntarily and leave it there, especially when you consider that he was fleeing in broad daylight in a suburban neighborhood at a time when a number of residents were leaving their house for work or school, so there was a big risk of someone seeing his face. And that's exactly what happened, as a few eyewitnesses did catch a glimpse of his face, though none of them got a good enough look to provide a detailed description. The biggest problem I have is the killer's claim that he took off his mask so that Roger would know who killed him and why. Many people believe that Roger knew his killer and had prearranged a meeting with him at the house, so it doesn't make much sense for him to remove his mask and reveal his identity if Roger already knew who he was. It seems like the main reason he put the mask on to begin with was to conceal his face from DJ, so that line about removing the mask just comes across as a writer trying way too hard to sound like a cold-blooded psycho, rather than telling the truth about what happened. Anyway, out of all the victims featured on Unsolved Mysteries, DJ Dean was one of the people I felt most sorry for, since in a span of just under 3 years, she lost her husband, her son, and her parents. And then only a few years after that, she had to go through the ordeal of being extorted for money and having her daughter's life threatened. If that wasn't enough, DJ also had to hear accusations that Roger himself was responsible for arranging someone to point a gun at her and put her through the trauma of being tied up. If the same person is actually responsible for both Roger's murder and the extortion scheme, then they have put DJ through an exceptionally cruel experience. This is a really bizarre case, and I suppose the only way we might find out the full truth about what happened is if the DNA evidence finally leads to a suspect. Barring that, if you happen to have any information about the unsolved murder of Roger Dean, please contact the Douglas County Sheriff's Department at 303-660-7500. That's 303-660-7500. However, if you just have your own thoughts about what happened, feel free to leave me a comment or send me an email at robin.warder@icloud.com. That's robin.warder@icloud.com. Another reminder that The Trail Went Cold is on Patreon, so please visit patreon.com/thetrailwentcold to learn how you can support our podcast and become eligible for some pretty neat rewards. We've already produced a bunch of exclusive bonus episodes for our patrons in tiers 2 and 3, and our most recent episode covers the murder of 14-year-old Ricky Ann Blake, whose family was targeted by a series of disturbing anonymous phone calls over the next several years. We've also implemented a bonus reward for our patrons in Tier 3, in which I record my own audio commentary track, which you can play over episodes of Unsolved Mysteries, and I did my most recent commentary over an episode with some all-time classic segments, including the murder of Terry McClure, the murder for hire of T.K. Hardy, and the infamous story of Liz Carmichael and her fraudulent three-wheeled car known as the Dale. So to learn more information, feel free to visit our Patreon page. I'd also like to give a shout out to our most recent listeners who have signed up with us on Patreon this week, and they are Kenny F., Stephanie, Joshua S., Brinus, Christine H., and Rick W. And incidentally, I just met Rick and Christine and hung out with both of them at CrimeCon this past weekend, so a huge thanks to you two and everyone else for your support. You've probably heard me announce that I'll be returning to Toronto this summer to participate in another true crime podcasting event at the Royal Cinema on the afternoon of August the 18th. In addition to myself, other podcasters who will be participating include Christy from Canadian True Crime, Jordan from the Nighttime Podcast, Nina from Already Gone, and Aaron from Generation Y. The event will include case presentations, panel discussions, an interactive Q&A, and a meet and greet. Tickets are $25 each, and you can find the link to our website to purchase them in our episode description. And in only 1 month, I will be appearing at the True Crime Podcast Festival being held at the Marriott Downtown Hotel in Chicago on July the 13th. Dozens of your favorite true crime podcasters will be there, and I will be teaming up with Christy from Canadian True Crime to do a live show in which we'll be discussing some Canadian cases. So to learn more information about this event and to purchase tickets, feel free to visit their website at tcpf2019.com. I also just wanted to give another shout out to my supporters at the Unsolved Mysteries message board at the Sitcoms Online forum and the Unresolved Mysteries subreddit. Need to provide a big thanks to Miguel Foote, who edits and assembles this podcast together for me, and Vince Nitro, who composes the eerie music you hear on every episode. If you haven't already, you can like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, or leave us a rating or review on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play Music, or Spotify. So have yourself a good week, and join me next Wednesday for a brand new episode of The Trail Went Cold.